Welcome to the Leading Owls podcast, brought to you by Rice University's Doerr Institute for New Leaders. Each week, we bring you inspiring stories and practical tips from successful student leaders, faculty, and staff, along with leadership experts and coaches that will help guide you in your own leadership journey. Today, we are sitting down with Aaron Pomerantz, PhD, a Postdoctoral Research Fellow at the Doerr Institute for New Leaders at Rice University. Aaron and I go beyond the bottom line in this episode to discuss the true ROI of leader development programs and how they can impact the culture and overall retention at organizations and institutions. We also discuss how important it is for organizations to be able to truly measure the outcomes of their leader development programs in order to determine the actual value that they are getting. Please welcome Aaron. Hi, Aaron. Thanks for joining us.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
What role does leader development play in improving company culture and employee retention?
Research shows that it does increase retention significantly. And the reason is because you're developing that individual leader, but if you're doing it in the right way and you're doing it in a way that considers the environment, you're helping a lot of different people. People like working for a boss or a leader who makes them feel seen and valued and appreciated. And there's even research showing that people will take a pay cut if they like the environment they're working in. And that's more important to them than necessarily more money. Kind of too early to tell, but there are some trends that show this effect might be intensifying as there's sort of a backlash against grind culture. So if what matters is the environment, who sets the environment? It's the leader. Now, that doesn't mean the leader has to come down like a ton of bricks and say, this is the way things will be. But like, if you've ever been in a toxic workplace environment, ultimately, that does go back up to the leadership, whether it's a more direct leader who just lets toxic coworker X get away with whatever they want, or whether it's, an individual leader who's really trying to make a difference, but higher ups just don't want to give them the ability to negotiate. Whatever it is, that leader is not leading. Some leader is not leading if the environment's turned bad. So if you want people to stay, you need a good environment, and leadership is how you do that.
That's very true. And I think we've all experienced how bad a toxic work environment can be.
Yeah.
A good environment is worth its weight in gold. It's worth the pay cut. How do you balance the financial investment in leader development with the often less quantifiable long-term benefits?
It's a mission, vision, values conversation. You need people to be doing this for the right reasons, and they need to be invested for more than just the financial benefits. Again, the financial benefits may come, but they also may not. The returns are variable, and they can take different amounts of time. We know that overall there is an effect, but research is probabilistic. It's the same way that, in general, you should wear a seatbelt. Just saying that in general, you shouldn't smoke. My great aunt has smoked every day for 60 years and she's doing fine. That doesn't mean smoking is a good idea because of this one exception. And in the same way, long-term trends, you should not be relying on those to be like, we're going to do leader development and we're going to see X amount of revenue increase. It needs to be something that takes that into consideration, but also goes who we are as an organization, what we want to accomplish, what we see ourselves accomplishing, and the reasons why we want to accomplish it are what are going to drive our leader development efforts. That's the sort of conversation that needs to occur if you want to figure out what that balance means to you. And because I've just been very cagey about this, I will finish off by saying, yes, there are benefits. And yes, over time, they're probably going to manifest. They are worth it. It's not just improved retention rates. It's everything from employee well-being, sense of belonging, engagement, performance. And these are things you can measure and see along the way. But even so, I would recommend getting into leader development for the right reasons.
What challenges do organizations typically face when trying to implement or assess leader development programs?
I'd say there are 4. One is just impatience. It's our leader development and we want it now. There is no J.G. Wentworth call 877 leader development now, which is probably a dated reference at this point. But people want results quickly. They want a magic bullet. There's no way to do that. Leader development takes time. You're changing who somebody is. And with very closely related to that impatience is maintaining momentum, keeping people committed. It's kind of like working out, not to keep going back to the health metaphor, but if your idea for working out is that you're going to see results really, really quickly, whether it's losing weight or gaining muscle or increased endurance or whatever that is, a lot of people give up in the first couple of months. If you're a gym person or a trail running person, there's always that January, February boost as people have their resolutions and then they don't see the results and they're like, I'm going back to my old ways. That's hard. and it's hard in leader development as well. Like you have to be patient and wait for these things to come. Slightly different to that is the idea of there's going to be some resistance to change. Leader development can defy a lot of conventional wisdom, whether it's in a simple way like, leaders are born. I can recognize who's going to be a good leader with my gut. Versus more controversial ideas like emotional intelligence. Some people view emotional intelligence as soft and they don't like it. They want someone who's tough and authoritarian. And that's what they view leadership as. They're confusing it with the 3 Ps, power, prestige, and popularity. I only don't have the 4 Ps because it's hard to make pretty into a noun. And it's kind of like there are literally people who think that leadership is just about being good looking. And they rate people's leadership as being better because they look the part more. And it's like, well, that's really not something you can develop. That's something that's so relative and so unconnected from actual good leadership that if you don't address that, you're going to get some kickback when you're trying to, get buy-in for an executive coaching program or something like that.
What advice would you give to an organization struggling, like so many are, to see the value in their current leader development efforts?
I'd just say start small. Identify a few metrics and say, this is what we care about. Have that mission, vision, values conversation and pick a few metrics. Make sure you're measuring them well. This is precision work. This can't be scattershot. It's like, what matters to us? How can we measure them? And then from there, I would really stress the importance of evidence-based practice. I think probably the reason I'm going back to this health analogy is because health is very similar to leader development in the sense of there's a lot of charlatans, is the nice way of putting it. There are a lot of people out there who at best don't know what they're talking about and at worst don't care and are actively selling you snake oil. And that's true in health and that's true in the leader development space. So make sure you're drawing from the right sources. If you don't know how to tell that, it's worth bringing in a consultant. If this is something you want to do fast, cheap, and easy, it's probably not doable. Now, of course, it is scalable. I'm not saying throw all your budget in your leader development program. But talk to, I'm biased, a psychologist, but really anyone who has measurement background and background in leader development and can say, here's what the evidence says. Look for somebody like David Day or other names like Avolio or Antonakis or Johnson. Like look for people who are working in this space and doing the research in this space, who are leaders in this space. They may not be the most popular or powerful or even most prestigious, but they have the evidence on their side. And be sure you know how to do that. And then let that guide you and embrace the long, slow process of development and growth and monitor it and wait to see the flowers bloom, basically.
So for people who have leader development and are interested in measuring it in a more meaningful way, the Doerr Institute does have an online course that teaches impact assessment. It's an introductory course. Can you tell us more about this course? It's called Demystifying Measurement and Leader Development.
Yeah, so Demystifying Measurement is a 6-week online course, so you don't have to come to Houston, which is good because we're next offering it in the spring and the weather will be even hotter than it is now. But you can do it from wherever. And the goal of this course, it's not to make you an expert in leader development and it's not to make you an expert in measurement, but it's designed to give you enough information to even know where to start. And that's kind of the challenge, I think, with a lot of leader development literature and trying to figure out, where do I even start? Who do I listen to? There's so many voices here. Who in this space should I prioritize? And to know whether you're engaging with something that's evidence-based or not, that's something that can be taught. With this course, it's not shallow. It's a rigorous course. We meet for like 3 hours at a time, 6 weeks in a row. And the goal here is to talk about what do you look for. There's a huge project. This is not just a lecture. There's a project element to this where you get to hands-on look at a leader development program in your context and figure out how would you measure it? How would you do the impact assessment? And then either myself or Dr. Brown, who teaches the course, we work with you and we look at your project and we go, here's the good, here's the bad, and you can refine it and have something that you walk away with that is in fact doable. It's not a statistics course. Like ultimately, if you don't know how to do the statistics, you will have to outsource that. But you can walk away from this course with an idea of, okay, I know where to start now. Yeah, that's the very quick spiel.
I think that's great. It's a great introductory for people who don't know where to begin. How has the approach to leader development evolved in recent years, especially with remote and hybrid work models?
Leader development, I would say that it hasn't evolved necessarily as much as it has expanded. The same things still matter because of the pandemic. We know that coaching, which is a huge and very impactful leader development tool, coaching can be done just as effectively over Zoom.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, what matters is that you're committed to it. Now, what I would say it has expanded is that even though the core things that you need to develop in a leader haven't changed, the contexts have changed a little bit. Some people are saying, in-person work is coming back, hybrid work, flexible work, that was just a trend. And I'm just always reminded of the Nobel Prize winning economist, Paul Krugman, who decided he should get outside of his lane and go into fortune telling. And in 1998 said, quote, by 2005 or so, it will become clear that the internet's impact on the economy has been no greater than the fax machines.
He actually said that?
He actually said that. I Snopes it, and Snopes is like, yep, 100% true. He said this. Well, it's 2024, and whenever I see people require that I have a fax machine, I'm like, oh, sorry, we don't have those where I live. I live in the 21st century, and we don't use the fax machine, but we do use the internet. So I don't want to fortune tell. I don't. It doesn't really matter, and it doesn't change our approach whether or not remote work stays or goes. What matters is, are you trying to change or develop who people are and give them the skills necessary for this context? And so right now that involves remote work. And right now that means you need to develop leaders who are able to get stuff done, even if not everyone is in the office all the time.
Yes, I believe remote work and hybrid work is here to stay. It really is. If there's one takeaway you want listeners to remember about assessing the true value of leader development, what would it be?
I think, to quote John Doerr himself, because it's a good quote, not because he's the person this institute is named after, but you have to measure what matters. If there's one thing I think people need to remember is that you need to measure what matters. And because leader development is such a long-term and involved process, and its value comes in the long term and in changing who people are, and they in turn kind of spreading it on, sounds more like a religious experience than I mean it to, but it really is. It's a social phenomenon. You need to keep that in mind and measure accordingly. If you're measuring what matters, measurement is not an incidental part of the development process. It starts right from the beginning. When you have that first mission, vision, values conversations, what do we expect to see out of this? And can we measure it meaningfully? Because if we can't know that it works, then there really isn't a point. If your desire is to see that it works. If your desire is to indulge somebody who wants some such and such a program to be there, that could be great. But that's not leader development. And that's a very different conversation. So if you want to actually develop people, you got to measure what matters.
How can organizations start a conversation about the non-monetary value of leader development within their teams or executive boards?
I am going to sound like a broken record, but it really depends on the context. That's really going to have to shape the appeal that you make and how you start that conversation. But again, there are some broad principles I'd recommend. And I would say that the recipe is going to involve 3 types of appeals. And how you precisely combine them depends on your context. But first of all, bring in evidence, bring in research, bring in impact assessment, bring in the literature. Don't just say, wouldn't it be nice? Say, hey, here's what the research says. At the same time, bring in bottom line approaches. I know this is beyond the bottom line, but ignoring that isn't necessarily helpful either. Just be like, hey, this isn't just a money pit. This is something that's going to have important, tangible impacts, not just for our leaders and our culture, but for the organization, whether that's a company, whether that's a college, whether that's a club. These are going to help the bottom line, whatever the bottom line may be, and maybe even bring in personal stories. You can find on this podcast and elsewhere, you can find personal stories of what development means and how it looks and how it matters. And I think ultimately the goal has to be, when you start these conversations, to show that leader development isn't just investing in individuals, it's also investing in the long-term health, resilience, and adaptability of the organization in which you are developing those leaders as well.
I think that's awesome. I've loved talking to you today because it's shown how much leader development can impact the day-to-day workings of an organization or an institution.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If you don't have good leader development, it's not an incidental thing. It's going to be something you can kind of see in some way every day.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your leader development wisdom from the research point of view. It's such a different way to look at it, and how important measuring what you're doing is, and not just falling into the training mindset. So thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, no worries. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for joining us for the Leading Owls podcast. We will be back next week with more leadership journeys and tips to share. New episodes release each Wednesday. For more information on the Doerr Institute for New Leaders and our free leader development programs for Rice students, please visit doerr.rice.edu.